The summer of 1975 that buried Britain in snow. The history of British weather is full of whims, but no single event has remained etched in the nation's memory as sharply, as absurdly, and as terrifyingly as the summer of 1975. It was a year when nature itself seemed to decide to completely rewrite the laws of physics, climate, and the calendar. Imagine, the beginning of June, the United Kingdom had just emerged from a long, grey winter and a cool, rainy spring. People had finally sighed with relief and pulled light clothing from their wardrobes. Cricket pitches, that sacred British summer tradition, had opened across the country, and at the courts of Wimbledon, preparations for the world's premier tennis tournament were in full swing. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and the anticipation of a long, warm season. But instead of a gentle sun, a polar nightmare descended upon Britain, entering the annals of history under the headline, "The Summer It Snowed." This wasn't just a brief morning frost or a light dusting of hail. It was a full-scale, fierce snowstorm that paralyzed traffic, halted international sporting events, and forced millions of Britons to huddle in terror and confusion inside winter coats in the very middle of June. To understand the magnitude of what happened, one must look at the atmospheric conditions over the North Atlantic in the final days of May 1975. Forecasters of the time, lacking modern satellite systems and supercomputers, began to notice a frightening anomaly. A powerful anticyclone, forming near Iceland, blocked the usual westerly winds that typically bring the mild warmth of the Gulf Stream to Britain. Instead, the gates of hell opened upon the islands, though they were made of ice rather than fire. A vast mass of Arctic air, which had accumulated over Greenland and the very heart of the North Pole, rushed in a direct, undiluted stream to the south. This icy knife cut through Britain from the Orkney Islands to the English Channel. By June the 1st, temperatures in Scotland began to drop at a terrifying rate, and the usual summer rain suddenly turned into stinging, dry ice pellets. But what occurred the following day, June the 2nd, shocked even the most cynical meteorologists at Bracknell. On Monday, June 2nd, 1975, Britons woke up to find themselves in a different reality. Snow began to fall across a giant territory, from the rugged highlands of Scotland to the rolling hills of Kent and the Sussex coast. It was the first recorded event in the history of official meteorological observations where snow fell in the south of England in June, a month traditionally considered the start of summer. The most legendary, almost comical moment of that day was the abandonment of a cricket match between Derbyshire and Lancashire in the spa town of Buxton. The players had taken the field in their traditional brilliant white flannel suits, expecting a lazy summer game accompanied by birdsong. But within 40 minutes, the pitch was entirely white. The umpires, shivering from the cold, were forced to stop play when the snow reached a depth of over an inch. Footage of cricketers trying to spot a red ball in a thick June blizzard became the visual symbol of this climatic madness. That day, Buxton saw about 4 inches of snow, and the drifts did not melt until late evening, creating a surreal landscape of green trees topped with heavy white caps. However, the scale of the disaster was not limited to sporting curiosities. Total chaos instantly erupted on the nation's roads. Thousands of drivers had already abandoned winter habits. Many were heading out for family holidays in campers. Cars were loaded with summer gear, and tires were completely unsuitable for driving on black ice. Vehicles bogged down en masse on the snowy routes of the Peak District and the foothills of the Pennines. In London and the surrounding home counties, temperatures dropped to values that were officially lower than the average statistics for January. People who had left for work in the morning wearing light shirts, summer dresses and sandals found themselves trapped in an icy wind and dense, wet snow. In parts of Essex and Hertfordshire, the blizzard was so intense that visibility on motorways was reduced to 5 or 10 meters. It was a haunting sight: lushly blooming chestnuts, apple trees in blossom, and rose bushes whose petals were weighed down and scorched by the cold of heavy snowflakes. British nature was in a state of profound shock. June is a time when the ecological system is at its peak of vulnerability. Birds that had already hatched their chicks desperately tried to protect their nests from the frost. Many insectivorous species perished during those days due to the sudden disappearance of their food source. But the most terrible blow was dealt to agriculture. For farmers, the beginning of June is a critical phase for the growth of grains, vegetables, and fruits. The frosts accompanying the snowstorm destroyed thousands of hectares of sugar beet and early potato crops. The orchards of Kent, known as the Garden of England, suffered the most. Fruit trees mass-dropped their blossoms and buds under the weight of snow and ice, signifying the near-total loss of the year's harvest. In Scotland and Wales, sheep farmers fought a literal battle for the lives of newborn lambs who were dying of hypothermia on open pastures. For a country already undergoing severe economic turmoil, strikes, and galloping inflation in the mid-70s, this climatic blow was truly crushing. Fresh food prices skyrocketed in the following months, serving as a bitter reminder of the week when June turned into January. Daily life for Britons changed within hours. In homes where heating systems had long been turned off, it became unbearably cold. Coal companies and gas services recorded an anomalous surge in energy consumption, comparable to the harshest winter peaks. People frantically pulled heaters and warm blankets out of storage, items that had seemingly been tucked away until late autumn. Social services were overwhelmed with calls from the elderly trapped in their cooling homes without fuel supplies. In markets and shops, warm clothing and umbrellas vanished instantly, while sales of ice cream and soft drinks, which traditionally grow in June, plummeted to zero. Interestingly, the snowy summer of 1975 was only the beginning of a series of incredible weather anomalies. Britain at that time seemed to become a testing ground for the most extreme climate scenarios. After the Arctic front finally retreated a week later, the country faced the mirror opposite of the cold. Just a few weeks after the June snow, an incredible parching heat wave arrived. July and August of 1975 became some of the hottest and driest in the entire history of 20th century observations. The very same people who had been shivering with cold and lighting fireplaces in June were now suffering from drought and a severe shortage of drinking water. The contrast was so great that frightening theories began to circulate in society. Scientists and journalists seriously discussed the start of a global climatic shift. The global cooling theory, popular in those years, received a powerful boost. Many believed that snow in June was a sure omen of a new ice age that would cover Europe in the coming decades. Psychologically, this summer completely exhausted the British people. The transition from icy shock to exhausting tropical heat in just one season left the nation in a state of climatic bewilderment. The meteorological explanation for the 1975 phenomenon lies in an extremely rare, almost unique bend in the jet stream. the powerful high-altitude wind that acts as the conductor of weather across the northern hemisphere. In that fateful year, the stream bent so sharply that it formed a giant loop over the North Sea. This loop, like an enormous pump, scooped up frosty, dense air directly from the central Arctic basin and poured it onto the British Isles. It was a statistical outlier that happens once every 100 or 200 years. However, for ordinary people standing on the snowy streets of London, Birmingham, or Sheffield that day, scientific terms meant absolutely nothing. They saw with their own eyes the collapse of the familiar world order, where summer is a time for warmth and winter is a time for snow. The legacy of June 1975 lives on in Britain's memory today, having turned into a vital part of national folklore. Every member of Generation X or the baby boomers has their own personal, deeply emotional story about that strange day. Some still recall how a long-awaited school trip to the seaside was cancelled because the beaches of Brighton were covered in a layer of snow and ice. Others tell of how their father, cursing, searched the dark garage for the winter shovel he had ceremoniously put away on the furthest shelf just a week prior. For British culture, where the weather is the primary and eternal topic of conversation, the events of 1975 became a benchmark. Since then, an unwritten rule has existed in Britain: never trust the calendar completely. The events of that year also changed the approach to meteorology in the United Kingdom. The government realized that climatic anomalies could inflict colossal damage on the economy, exceeding the consequences of political crises. Funds were allocated to modernize forecasting systems, which eventually led to the creation of one of the most advanced meteorological services in the world, the modern Met Office. Today, in the era of rapid global warming, when heat records are broken every year, snow in June seems even more impossible and fantastical than it did half a century ago. But 1975 serves as an eternal reminder of how fragile our civilization is and how powerful, unpredictable, and ironic nature can be. Britain stood firm and survived that strange summer, but it forever changed the collective consciousness of the nation. Since then, the British have known, if the forecast promises sun and clear skies, just in case, it's still worth keeping not only sunglasses nearby, but also a warm wool sweater. After all, in this country, even the warmest June can suddenly turn into a harsh winter. It was a time when reality surpassed the wildest fantasies of fiction writers. The ice storm of 1975 remains in history as the Great June Deception. It showed that a nation's history is not just about dates of battles, changes in government, or economic reforms. It is also about those moments when the entire population of a vast country freezes in a single impulse, looking out the window at falling large snowflakes, at the very time when nightingales should be singing in the gardens and wild meadows should be in bloom. It was a year when Britain was literally buried under snow at the most unexpected moment of its history, leaving behind only faded photographs of snow-covered summer cafes and the collective memory of the strangest, most frightening, and most amazing summer in the life of the nation. This has been a detailed chronicle of that incredible time when the calendar diverged from reality. I hope this deep dive into history has helped you feel the full absurdity and grandeur of that icy June. If you enjoy such detailed breakdowns of unusual historical events and climate dramas of the past, make sure to subscribe to my channel